an ally of the Egyptians. So when Nebuchadnezzar II attacks Jerusalem for having sided with the Egyptians, and he launches a massive deportation of all of the royalty and all of the nobility who live in Jerusalem. This includes a teenager named Daniel, and his three friends who will be renamed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This massive deportation of the royalty and nobility is known as the Babylonian captivity, and it lasts for 70 years. Now, this attack against Jerusalem, it's the first of three such attacks, is documented in the Babylonian Chronicles. This is a collection of tablets, I believe they're written in Akkadian, that were discovered in 1881. If you want to see them, they're found in the British Museum. These tablets give us tons of information about Nebuchadnezzar, about the Babylonian Empire, and so on. And against claims, which we've all heard people, skeptics and so on, argue that the Bible is historically inaccurate, that it's filled with contradictions, that it's just mythology, that it's just fiction, it's just a bunch of stories and so on. Well, the Babylonian Chronicles, as you read through them, you actually discover that they confirm point by point the accuracy of what Daniel writes about in this important book of the Bible. For those of you who are following along this morning on YouVersion, I included a link to this particular cylinder in the Babylonian Chronicles, so you can actually go through and read what the Babylonians had to say about what the Bible has to say. Now, Daniel and his friends arrive in Babylon, where they are given Babylonian names. The names that they had all reflected their relationship with the God of Israel. But when they move, when they're deported to Babylon, they're given new names that point to the Babylonian gods. Not only are they given new names, but they are chosen to receive 3 years of training in Babylonian language, religion, and culture, with the intention that they become a part of the Babylonian bureaucracy. Babylonian bureaucracy. You think we've got bureaucracy? Wait till next week. You don't know bureaucracy until you've been to Babylon. The Babylonian Empire is huge, and it incorporates all kinds of different people, different languages, different cultures, and so on. What better way to strengthen the grip of this Babylonian Empire and manage all these diverse peoples than train bureaucrats from among the people that you've defeated? And so Daniel and his friends are being chosen. They're being kind of prepped and prepared to become bureaucrats in this huge Babylonian government. But there is a problem. And we find it in Daniel chapter 1, verse 8. Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or the wine that he drank. Now, for whatever reason, and we could speculate as to what that is, Daniel feels that to eat this particular king's food and to drink his wine would defile him. It's because Daniel has grown up in a culture where he's been taught the difference between right and wrong, between what's appropriate for the people of God and what's not appropriate. I was talking earlier about character development and values education and so on. Daniel has grown up in a culture, in a family, in a worshiping community in which he's taught the difference between right and wrong. And he knows, if I take this stuff, it's going to defile me. Now, the text doesn't say why Daniel believed that the king's food would defile him. It's possible, I think it's probable, that the food was not kosher. I think it's also possible, if not probable, that the wine had been offered to the pagan gods of Babylon. But for whatever reason, he knew that it was going to violate God's will. Now, I want to remind you that Daniel at this time is a teenager. Now, when we send our teenagers off to college, can we have the same kind of confidence that they're going to know the difference between right and wrong, and that when they're presented with stuff? Because here's what they're going to get in college. It doesn't really matter what you believe. You know, those are just rules. Those are just repressive, and so there's just all of this pressure. Daniel feels same pressure to kind of conform. So what is he going to do? Daniel's dilemma is actually a case study in a situation that you have probably been in. And by the way, it doesn't just include students, it includes us as grown-ups as well. What do you do? Has this ever happened to you? What do you do when somebody, especially someone in power, let's say it's someone you work for, they're pressuring you to do something that violates your conscience, that goes against your values and your beliefs? They're asking you to do something, and you look at it, and it just doesn't feel right. It seems wrong. If you do the thing that you know is right, you might get a promotion, or at least a commendation. Stand up for what's right, on the other hand, and you might get fired. You ever been there? I gave this message last night. I had people coming up to me and said, this happened to me when I worked at such and such a place. I didn't know what to do. In Daniel's case, he might lose his life. Now, the book of Daniel is interesting for all kinds of reasons. In addition to being written, it's one of the few books of the Bible that's actually written in two different languages. It's written in both Hebrew. The first chapter and first couple of verses in chapter 2 are written in Hebrew. And then it switches, once we get to these kind of Babylonian court narratives and stuff, it switches, it's really cool, to a different language, the language of the court in Babylon, which suggests it was really written during this period of time. In addition to being written in two different languages, it's found in two very different parts of the Bible, depending on whether you're looking at a Jewish Bible or a Christian Bible. Different orderings. Daniel's placed among the prophets in the Christian Bible. So you go through the canon, you see Isaiah, Jeremiah, book of Lamentations, which is attributed to Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, prophet. If you look at Jewish ordering, though, Daniel is included in the writings, in the wisdom literature, along with books like Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. One of the things that we see, you could argue either way. One of the things we see in chapter 1 is Daniel really does demonstrate wisdom and discernment that are way beyond his years. Daniel asks the person in charge, the chief of eunuchs, as he's called, he just asks for permission. I would like permission not to eat this stuff. I would like permission not to defile myself. And he immediately gets some pushback. Not because this person doesn't like Daniel, he does. But it's because he is afraid that if he allows Daniel not to eat what the king has provided for him, that he himself is going to get in trouble. The king would have my head because of you, he says. So Daniel floats an idea by this person. He proposes a kind of quiet, it's sort of like the skunk works, he proposes this quiet 10-day test where Daniel and his friends would not eat anything at all except vegetables. They weren't going to drink the king's wine. And he says that after 10 days, you can compare how we look and how we're feeling in our health and stuff with the folks who are eating the king's food and drinking the king's wine. And then you can make a determination. And this guy goes, okay, 10 days, we'll keep it, on the QT and all that. Let's go. After 10 days, here's what we discover. Daniel's vegetarian, fat-free, gluten-free diet has done wonders. And he and his friends are way healthier than anybody else. So shout out to the vegetarians, vegans, and gluten-free folks that we have among us today. And so they are exempted from eating the food and drinking the wine that would have defiled them. So we're told, as for these four youths, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Their training is completed after this 3-year period, and they're brought before the king, and the king interviews them. And book of Daniel tells us, in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them. They're basically getting their final oral exams from the king here, who wants to know if they've learned the language, the culture, all this kind of stuff. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all of his kingdom. Well, of course he would, because enchanters and magicians are bogus. This episode and the one that follows in chapter 2 are meant to help us see something that's really important and of application to our lives here and now. And that's this, that we can serve God and we can live with integrity and we can be a blessing to other people, even in, maybe especially in, an unbelieving culture. Let me repeat that. We can serve God, live with integrity, and be a blessing to others, even in an unbelieving culture. I mentioned our students just a little while ago. As I read the book of Daniel, I can't help but think about all of our students who are heading off to college or entering the workplace, where their beliefs are going to be challenged and their values are going to be tested, just like ours are. Daniel demonstrates that it's possible, borrowing from Jesus, a phrase from Jesus, it's possible to be in the world but not of the world. Daniel models a way that believers can not only be with or coexist with, but actually bless other people who don't share their values or beliefs. And how do you do that? How do you do that? Well, like Daniel, this is what we can do. We learn all that we can about the culture in which we find ourselves, but we think critically about that culture and about what we're learning. You know, people, if you're going off to college right now, or if you have kids that are going off to college, people are going to challenge you to look at your beliefs and values critically. They might even ridicule them. And it's okay to look at the Christian faith critically. It can stand up to scrutiny. Just be sure that if somebody asks you to look critically at your values and beliefs, turn it around and ask them to look just as critically at theirs. And you look just as critically at theirs as well. Explore the assumptions. Not only that, do your work with excellence. Serve with excellence. You can be a blessing to people, even if they don't share your values. Make wise choices. Don't violate your conscience. Live with integrity. You know, the world needs us to be Christian, not just to go along with everyone else. The world needs us to have values and beliefs. And when we're willing to live those out and embody them, God, according to the book of Daniel, and I believe all of Scripture confirms this, God blesses us when we do that. Now, chapter 1 concludes with an important note, and it's one of these kind of notes. As you're reading through Daniel, you just might go, okay, I guess, whatever. But it says, and Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus. Now, why is that an important note? Because it tells us that Daniel serves in the king's court from 605 to 535 BC. That's 70 years. That is the entire 70 years of the Babylonian captivity. He goes to Babylon as a teenage kid, and he's like 80 or 90 years old when finally the Babylonian captivity is over. He is the prophet of the Babylonian captivity. He's faithful to God, not in the Holy Land, but in this culture in which he is the minority. There's a majority religion, and it's not his. And they all lived happily ever after. Right? Well, if you read the book of Daniel, you know that's not exactly the case. In chapter 2, we're told that King Nebuchadnezzar, this would be, history calls him Nebuchadnezzar the second, we're told that King Nebuchadnezzar starts having these bad dreams. And they're so terrible that he doesn't even talk about them with other people, and they keep him up at night. And so he calls his counselors together, the magicians, enchanters, and sorcerers, the magi, the wise men, and he tells them his problem. I'm having these dreams, and they're keeping me, and they're troubling, and they're disturbing, and I don't know what they mean. And so his counselors say to him, tell us your dream, and we will interpret it. The king responds in a really interesting way. I think he's had questions about these characters for a while, because he says, no, if you're legit, rather than me telling you my dream and you interpreting it, you tell me my dream and then interpret it. Now that's a test. So they come back to him and say, there is no man on earth who can do that. And the king says, fine. And so he orders that all these wise men, all the wise men in his kingdom everywhere, be killed because they're charlatans. The problem is, this includes Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Arioch, the captain of the guard, is dispatched, and he's looking for Daniel. He discovers Daniel. He announces to him what the king has declared. Daniel, with prudence and discretion, the Bible tells us. Prudence and discretion, these are characteristics of the person of wisdom. He asks for some time, and he asks for an audience with the king so that he can interpret the dream. He's granted time. He's granted an audience. But before he goes to the king, Daniel goes home, and he shares what he has learned with his friends, and he asks them to seek God's mercy so they won't be destroyed. They pray. They ask for God's mercy. And the Bible tells us the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision in the night. With that, Daniel, even before he's gone to the king to say what the dream was and to say what it means, Daniel praises God in the beautiful words of today's text. Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God, he says, to you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we ask of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. Now, what's really interesting is Daniel hasn't even gone to the king yet to share what he's learned. So there's no external confirmation that what he's learned is right. But he has such confidence in God that then and there, just as he's prayed to God, here he praises God for having answered the prayer. He's thanking and praising God all the same. So Daniel and his friends were told that they were about to lose their lives. And how do they respond? What does Daniel do? He asks for God's help, and then he gives God the glory. And this is an application for us, folks. Because when we're faced with a crisis or a challenge or a problem that it just seems insurmountable, when we're faced with a challenge, the best thing we can do is ask for God's help and then give God the glory. It's interesting to me that prayer and praise are Daniel's first resort. And this time, just to do kind of a moral inventory here, a little gut check. Is that what we do when we're faced with challenges and crises? Daniel asks the captain of the guard for a little time, and then he uses this little time that he has to get his friends together and to pray with them and to ask for God's mercy and God's help and God's assistance. He doesn't take the little time he has to hatch an escape plan or to try to contrive or invent some kind of story that would be applicable to any dream in general, like those horoscopes you read in the newspaper. He prays to God and asks God to help him. because he realizes that apart from God, really, we're all helpless. It's easy to forget how helpless we are apart from the Lord, but the truth is that we are utterly dependent on God's grace. I forget this. And, I'm a pastor. I've been a Christian for a long time. But I'll be honest with you, sometimes I get blindsided by something, or I'm faced with a challenge or a crisis, and my fallback position, the first thing I do isn't always to turn to God and just say, God, will you help me with this? I start falling back on my own abilities. Talk to people, try to figure it out, negotiate things. This isn't what Daniel does at all. He asks for God's help. Daniel appears before the king then, who asks, are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it? And he wants a yes or no to this thing because he doesn't want Daniel to waste his time. Are you able to do this thing? And Daniel answers, and really it's in quite an extraordinary way. He says, no man could do that. No man of wisdom, no enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery that he has asked about. And I could just imagine, don't pause, Daniel. You've got to finish this sentence. No man of wisdom can explain to the king the mystery he's asked about, but there is a God in heaven who can. And he's shown the king what will happen in days to come. And then Daniel describes this dream, the king's dream, and he's exactly right on. It's a dream of a giant image, and it's a giant image with a head of gold, with chest and arms of silver, with a middle and thighs of bronze, with legs of iron, and with feet, a mixture of iron and clay. You know the phrase, feet of clay? You know where it comes from? This story, this account, the Bible. Not only does he have a dream then about this statue, but he also dreams how a stone not cut by human hand strikes the feet of iron and clay and breaks the image, and it falls and shatters. The dream, Daniel says, describes the rise and fall of 4 great empires. And later readers, like us, would know that the king has dreamed about the rise and the fall of the Babylonian, the Medo-Persian, the Greek, and the Roman empires, and in precisely the order in which Nebuchadnezzar had dreamed. Isn't it interesting, by the way, how God can speak to believers in one way? God speaks to us as Christians in the Bible. He speaks to us as Christians through the person and work of Jesus Christ. He speaks to us as believers through the Holy Spirit and through brothers and sisters in the church family who likewise share a relationship with Christ. But that doesn't mean that God speaks only to believers. God speaks to people all around the world. Romans chapter 1 and chapter 2 talk about how God's revealed himself to all people in all times, in all places, just in different ways. In Nebuchadnezzar's case, he's revealed himself to Nebuchadnezzar in a dream. By the way, in the world, in our present day world, there are amazing stories of how God, Jesus Christ, is appearing to people in Muslim nations and countries, and appearing to them and revealing himself as the Son of God and as the Savior of the world. People are becoming Christians secretly because Christ is appearing to them in dreams. Because Bibles aren't allowed, but that's not stopping God from revealing himself. More than that, back to the story. The God of heaven, Daniel says, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. This, in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, Daniel's describing the kingdom of heaven, which we know is not only announced but made possible by our Lord Jesus Christ, the rock of our salvation. The cool thing is, Daniel doesn't take any credit for any of this. He says, a great God has made known to the king what is to come. And Nebuchadnezzar says, truly your God is God of gods and Lord of kings. Daniel's words and the king's response remind us that, wherever we find ourselves, Whether we're among people who are receptive to our faith and values and so on, or are resistant to them, wherever we find ourselves, our mission is to help other people know what God's really like. This is what Daniel does. He just lets Nebuchadnezzar know this is what God is really like. He changes times and seasons. He removes and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what's in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. You know, there's so many misunderstandings about who God is in our world today, who Jesus is, what the church is supposed to be about. And God has placed us in our network of relationships, not only amongst believers, but also amongst the unbelievers that we know, so that we can give them an accurate picture of who God is.